February 20th, 1943. The sky over Guadalcanal shimmered in the heat as Lieutenant Jimmy Collins from rural Iowa locked onto a Japanese Ki-43 Oscar fighter. His P-40 Warhawk closed to 200 yards, and the simple glowing dot of his reflector sight rested dead center on the enemy's tail. He squeezed the trigger. A stream of .50 caliber fire ripped forward and tore into nothing. Every round screamed past the Oscar by nearly 30 feet. The Japanese pilot rolled away effortlessly and vanished into a bank of clouds as if he had been toying with Collins the entire time. Collins sat in disbelief. He hadn't flinched. His guns were aligned. His aim was flawless. So why did he miss? What he didn't know was that he had just collided head-on with a problem far bigger than any one pilot. His bullets took half a second to cover those 200 yards, half a second in which the Oscar had already moved more than 180 feet sideways. He hadn't shot badly. He had shot perfectly at the wrong place. Collins wasn't failing as a pilot. He was failing as a physicist, and he wasn't alone. By early 1943, less than 5% of American fighter pilots had scored even a single aerial kill. They were aiming at what they could see, not where their targets would be. But on the other side of the Pacific, a quiet revolution was about to begin. One man would soon strap a new invention into his cockpit, a mechanical device capable of solving dozens of equations in real time, even in the chaos of a dive at 400 miles per hour. Pilots would no longer aim at enemy aircraft. They would fire into empty sky and hit twice as often. The age of instinctive shooting was over. The age of machine-guided killing had begun. The heat over Guadalcanal didn't just press down. It clung to everything. Sweat ran down Lieutenant Jimmy Collins' collar as he climbed into the cockpit of his P-40 Warhawk that morning in February 1943. He was only 23, a farm kid from Iowa who had traded cornfields for combat, but already he'd spent 8 brutal months in the Pacific skies. His squadron called him reliable, solid stick, good instincts, the kind of pilot you wanted on your wing when things went bad. But behind those compliments was another truth. Collins hadn't scored a single kill, not one. It wasn't for lack of courage. He showed up to every mission. He followed orders. He kept formation. But while others returned from sorties with smoking gun barrels and fresh victory markings painted under their cockpits, Collins returned empty. He had the nerve, the reflexes, even the mechanical know-how that came from years fixing tractors back home, but no victories, just survival. That morning's briefing was supposed to be routine. Japanese bombers expected near Henderson Field around midday, escorted by nimble Oscar fighters out of Rabaul. Collins had accepted his usual role. Wingman, a shadow to Captain Martinez. Stay tight, cover your lead, let the veterans take the shots. But fate intervened. Martinez had been grounded with a sudden case of dysentery, unfit to fly. And just like that, Collins was bumped up, leading his own element for the first time. 2 brand-new pilots fresh from training would be flying behind him, counting on him to keep them alive on their first taste of real combat. That responsibility settled over Collins, heavier than his parachute harness. He ran through his pre-flight checks, fuel topped, oil pressure good, ammunition belts loaded with 400 rounds in each wing. In front of him sat the same gunsight used by every American fighter pilot in the Pacific, the N9 reflector sight. Simple, trustworthy, outdated. No one in his squadron knew yet that the little glowing dot in that sight would soon be made obsolete. Radar picked up the incoming raid around 11:30 a.m. Moments later, Collins rammed the throttle forward and roared down the metal strip of Henderson Field. His Warhawk clawed its way into the sky, climbing into the tropical sun. Today was supposed to be just another mission, but for Collins, for the entire U.S. Air Force, it was the beginning of a transformation no one yet understood. The enemy formation appeared exactly where intelligence had predicted, 18 Japanese Betty bombers in a tight V, climbing steadily toward Henderson Field with a screen of Oscar fighters circling above them like hawks. Collins was the first to spot a straggler, an Oscar that had drifted just far enough from its unit to become a perfect target. He rolled his P-40 into a dive and called the attack over the radio. The 2 rookies behind him followed hesitantly. He lined the enemy up at 400 yards, then 300, then 200. This was it, his first chance. The Oscar filled his gun sight now, green and brown camouflage, bright red Hinomaru roundels, sunlight flashing across its canopy. Collins centered the glowing dot exactly where he had been trained to, right on the enemy fuselage. He squeezed the trigger. 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns unleashed a storm from his wings. The P-40 shuddered violently from the recoil. Tracers blazed toward the Oscar in straight, angry lines, then continued harmlessly past the tail, missed, again. Every bullet had flown behind the target by what looked like 30 to 40 feet. The Japanese pilot broke left, vanished into a cloud, and was gone. Collins stared through the gun sight in disbelief. He had closed the distance. His aim had been perfect. His plane was steady. The range was ideal. So how could he possibly miss at point-blank distance? The frustrating truth was this. Collins didn't shoot wrong. He shot late. His bullets may have been fast, almost 2,800 feet per second, but they weren't instantaneous. In just half a second of flight, the Oscar had already moved sideways, nearly 180 feet, leaving Collins' bullet stream chasing empty air. He had aimed at where the enemy was, instead of where it would be. That invisible mistake had a name. Deflection error. Ground gunners knew it. Submarine captains knew it. Even duck hunters back home in Iowa knew it. You have to lead a moving target. But doing that from a shaking cockpit in 3 dimensions, pulling G-forces at 300 miles per hour, while your target jinks and rolls, that was math no human could do fast enough. Collins wasn't alone in his failure. He was the rule, not the exception. Across the Pacific and Europe, American pilots returned from missions with empty ammo belts and nothing to show for it. Gun camera footage revealed shocking misses. Dozens of rounds fired exactly where the enemy used to be. The data was brutal. By early 1943, fewer than 5% of U.S. fighter pilots had shot down even a single enemy aircraft. A tiny handful of natural shooters, aces like Dick Bong and Tommy McGuire, were doing nearly all the killing. The rest, they were surviving, but barely, and certainly not winning. But change was coming, and it wouldn't come from better pilots or better guns. It would come from a machine. While Jimmy Collins wrestled with the mystery of missed shots in the Pacific, the solution had already begun taking shape 2 years earlier in a quiet laboratory in England. Inside the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough, Dr. Leslie Cunningham adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and stared at a spinning metal disc no bigger than a teacup. The device hummed steadily at 18,000 revolutions per minute. When Cunningham tried to tilt its frame, it fought him, twisting back stubbornly, as if it had a mind of its own. It was called a gyroscope, and it was about to rewrite the physics of aerial combat. The British had learned the same painful lesson as the Americans. Courage and firepower meant nothing without accuracy. During the Battle of Britain, RAF pilots had often returned from missions convinced they had scored hits, only for gun camera footage to reveal empty skies and wasted ammunition. Even the legendary Spitfire and Hurricane couldn't save pilots from the brutal truth. Hitting a moving target in air combat was nearly impossible using human estimation alone. Cunningham refused to accept that. For months he dissected the mathematics of combat gunnery, angles of deflection, rate of turn, bullet time to target. Every variable changed every second. The problem wasn't pilot skill. It was the limits of the human brain. Then he had a revelation. What if the calculations didn't have to be done by the pilot at all? What if a machine could do them automatically? The key was the gyroscope sitting on his workbench. A gyroscope resists changes in direction. That meant it could detect motion, specifically the turning of a fighter plane. If Cunningham could build a gun sight that used gyroscopes to measure how fast a pilot was turning, then it could predict where bullets needed to go to hit a moving enemy. He built the first prototype in 1941. It didn't look impressive, just a small metal box packed with spinning gyros, tiny gears, and optical lenses. But inside it was something revolutionary, a mechanical brain that adjusted the pilot's aim in real time, solving the deflection problem automatically. The gun sight worked by projecting two images onto a small glass reflector. One showed where the guns were currently pointed. The other, a floating pattern of diamonds, shifted ahead of the target, showing where the pilot needed to fire to hit it. All the pilot had to do was set the enemy plane's wingspan match the diamonds to the target while maneuvering pull the trigger. The machine did the math, without a single electron or transistor, just gyroscopes, pure physics. When squadron leader James Johnson, already an ace with 12 kills, was asked to test it, he was skeptical. No machine could outshoot a pilot with combat instincts, or so he thought. On his first test run, his hit rate jumped from 30% to 75%. Johnson landed, climbed out of his Hurricane, and sent a message straight up the RAF chain of command. This sight changes everything. It would take months before the Americans learned just how right he was. News of the British invention didn't reach the United States through a press release or official announcement. It traveled quietly, tucked inside classified intelligence reports marked URGENT, SCIENTIFICPRIORITY. American analysts couldn't believe what they were reading. The RAF had built a gun sight that let average pilots shoot like experts. Colonel Cass Ho, head of the U.S. Army Air Force's Armament Division, didn't trust second-hand reports. He flew to England himself. The moment he test-fired the device, he understood. This wasn't just another upgrade. This was a weapon multiplier. With it, any competent pilot could become deadly. America wanted it, and they wanted it fast. Hope turned to the one company capable of building such a delicate machine at scale, Sperry Corporation in Brooklyn. Sperry engineers had already been designing targeting computers for Navy warships, so when Ho dropped the British blueprints on their desks, they immediately saw the potential. Reverse engineering began overnight. What Britain had built in secret workshops by hand, the Americans would build by the thousands. By January 1943, Sperry had produced the U.S. version, the K-14 computing gun sight. It was lighter, stronger, and more refined than Cunningham's original design. The internals were a symphony of precision, over 400 machined components, dual gyroscopes spinning at 18,000 RPM, jeweled bearings just like luxury watches, and tiny gears cut to tolerances finer than a human hair. Inside the casing, a miniature mechanical computer performed 60 calculations per second, even during violent 4G combat turns. Despite that complexity, the sight itself was simple to use. Pilots could checkmark dial in enemy aircraft wingspan checkmark track while maneuvering checkmark fire exactly where the target would be. The gun sight calculated lead angle, range, and turn rate instantly. But there was a problem. The technology was so new that there was no training manual for it. The gun sight wasn't just a tool. It required pilots to unlearn instincts drilled into them since flight school. For decades they had been told, center the target and fire. The K-14 demanded the opposite, aim at nothing and trust the machine. Some pilots rejected it immediately, others didn't understand it. Some refused to mount it in their planes, but in a few squadrons, quietly, experimentally, the K-14 was installed, and those squadrons were about to discover what nobody else believed yet. The future of air combat no longer belonged to the best instinctive shooter. It belonged to the pilot who trusted physics. The first real test of the K-14 gun sight didn't happen in a training range or a controlled demonstration. It happened over enemy territory, where hesitation meant death. August 15, 1944, Romania. High over the blazing oil fields of Ploiești, 21-year-old Captain Chuck Joerger scanned the sky from the cockpit of his P-51 Mustang. Below him, columns of black smoke clawed their way into the sky, rising from refineries hammered by American bombers. Somewhere above those bombers, just as intelligence warned, a swarm of German fighters waited. Joerger had only been an ace for 3 months. His first kill was the old way, closing to within 100 yards of a German Bf-109 until he could practically see the pilot blink before firing. But today he flew with something new bolted to his instrument panel, one of the first K-14 computing gun sights delivered to the 8th Air Force. It had arrived with no celebration, no announcement, just a wooden crate stamped classified and a team of Sperry technicians who guarded it like a nuclear weapon. For days they calibrated the delicate gyroscopes while pilots hovered around them, whispering rumors.
Some didn't trust it, some mocked it, but Joerger, he wanted to try it. The opportunity came fast. A lone Messerschmitt Bf-109 appeared below him, climbing hard to intercept the American bombers. The German fighter crossed Joerger's nose at a steep angle, a classic deflection shot, the exact kind pilots wasted thousands of rounds missing. But today was not a normal day. Joerger didn't close the distance to knife fight range. He held position at 800 yards, twice the range he would normally dare to shoot from. He set the K-14's wingspan dial to 32 feet, the exact width of a Bf-109. The sight came alive, predicting the Germans' future position like it could see time itself. A floating diamond pattern drifted ahead of the enemy aircraft. It pointed at empty sky. The old instincts screamed, "Don't fire, there's nothing there." Joerger ignored them. He squeezed the trigger. 6 Browning machine guns roared, spitting 192 rounds in a controlled burst. The bullets arced through the sky, not at the Messerschmitt, but at the patch of nothingness the K-14 told him to shoot at. A heartbeat later, the German flew into the stream of gunfire. The impact tore into the engine, wings, and cockpit in a chain of explosions. The Messerschmitt rolled over once and dropped like a hammer, trailing black smoke. Time of engagement, 12 seconds. Rounds fired, 192. Distance, 600 yards. Pilot input, trust. The K-14 had just turned empty sky into a kill zone. Joerger pulled away without celebration. No shouting, no victory roll. Just a quiet, stunned voice over the radio. Greater than Jesus, it works. And across the squadron, pilots who had doubted the new gun sight suddenly leaned forward in their cockpits. This wasn't a gimmick anymore. This was a weapon. After that day over Romania, the story spread fast, but not through official channels. It moved through whispers in briefing tents, late-night hangar conversations, and smuggled letters home. The new sight doesn't miss. You don't aim at planes anymore. You aim at where they're going. It makes everybody shoot like an ace. And for once, the rumors were true. By the end of summer 1944, squadrons equipped with the K-14 began reporting results that bordered on unbelievable. Pilots were firing 60% less ammunition. Kill rates doubled in less than a month. More pilots achieved their first aerial victory in weeks than in the previous 2 years. The number of pilots becoming aces skyrocketed from 5% to nearly 20%. The impact was immediate and brutal for the enemy. The famed 357th Fighter Group, the Oxford Boys, saw their monthly kill totals jump from 15 to 35 after adopting the K-14. Over Germany, P-51 Mustangs with K-14s began picking apart Luftwaffe formations before they could even get within firing distance of American bombers. German pilots, once feared for precision and discipline, suddenly found themselves dying to long-range shots they didn't even think were possible. Veteran Luftwaffe ace Johannes Steinhoff wrote in his diary, "The Americans no longer aim at us. They fire at nothing and hit us anyway." Fear began to spread, not among American pilots, but among the enemy. Captured German reports described American guns with automatic aim and enemy aircraft that predict our maneuvers. Technical teams desperately tried to reverse engineer crashed Mustangs and Lightnings to discover the secret, but they were too late. They found the K-14, but they couldn't build it. Not with their collapsing factories, not with material shortages and Allied bombing grinding German industry into rubble. Air combat changed overnight. Before, dogfighting was a deadly dance, close, fast, and personal. pilots weaved and rolled, trying to get behind each other before firing. But with the K-14, American pilots didn't dogfight anymore. They hunted. They attacked from long range, killed in one burst, flew on without turning back. For the first time in the war, air combat wasn't decided by reflexes, aggression, or instinct. It was decided by physics, and the side with better math, the side with the K-14, was winning the sky. The first time replacement pilots saw Major Richard "Dick" Bong fly, they didn't expect a lesson. They expected a legend. It was December 17, 1944, at Tacloban Airfield in the Philippines. Bong, America's top fighter ace, walked across the tarmac like a man late for work, not someone with 39 confirmed kills. He didn't look dangerous. He didn't look intense. He looked ordinary. Maybe that was the most terrifying thing about him. New pilots watched him the way rookies watch veterans in any war, hungry for a secret. Surely he knew something they didn't, some hidden trick, some instinct no one could teach. One of them finally asked, "Sir, how do you use the K-14 in combat?" Bong could have bragged. He could have spoken like a hero. Instead, he spoke like a mechanic explaining how to fix a truck. "You don't outthink it," he said. "You trust it." Hours later, at 11,000 feet over Mindoro, he showed them why. A lone Japanese Kawasaki Ki-61. Tony appeared below his flight, fast, agile, and flown by one of the last experienced enemy pilots in theater. The Tony pilot was smart, constantly weaving, changing speed, refusing to fly straight long enough to be caught. A bad matchup for most pilots, but not today. Bong dialed the K-14 to the Tony's 32-foot wingspan, range 600 yards. He didn't dive. He didn't close distance. He stayed back, calm, unhurried, tracking his target as if he were lining up a deer in a winter field back home in Wisconsin. Then the Tony broke hard into a climbing turn, an expert defensive move designed to throw off any attacker. But it didn't throw off the K-14. The gyroscopes instantly adjusted for the change in turn rate. The diamond reticle swung even further ahead of the Tony. So far it looked like Bong was aiming at a piece of cloud miles in front of the enemy. The rookies watching from behind thought he had lost the target. Then Bong fired. A 3-second burst from his 4.50 caliber machine guns and 420mm cannons ripped across the sky. It didn't look like he was shooting at the Tony. It looked like he was shooting in faith. The Tony flew straight into the storm of lead and fire. A single violent blossom of orange flame ended the fight. The aircraft disintegrated in midair. "That," Bong said over the radio, almost casually, "makes 40. He didn't shout. He didn't celebrate. He just confirmed the kill and moved on. For months, pilots had argued. Was the K-14 a crutch? Was it cheating? Was it even reliable? Now they had their answer. When the best pilot in America trusted the K-14, so would everyone else. By late 1944, the K-14 gunsight ruled the skies. American kill ratios surged. Japanese pilots began avoiding combat altogether, unless ordered to attack in suicidal groups. Over Europe, the Luftwaffe, the once feared German Air Force, was bleeding to death. Entire fighter squadrons were wiped out faster than they could be replaced. Some German aces even refused to engage P-51 Mustangs head-on. The K-14 didn't just win battles, it broke enemy morale. For a few brief months, it felt like the Allies had achieved perfect air superiority. Then something appeared over Germany, something fast. The first sighting came from bomber crews who reported enemy aircraft that seemed to vanish during combat. Not dive away, not break, just outrun American fighters entirely. At first, pilots thought it was a myth. Then gun camera footage confirmed it. Swept wings, no propeller, and a speed so unbelievable that Mustangs couldn't even begin to catch it. The Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Suddenly, air combat changed again. The Me-262 didn't fight like anything before it. It didn't turn with Mustangs. It didn't climb with Thunderbolts. It didn't dogfight at all. It attacked like a missile. One high-speed pass at over 540 miles per hour, guns blazing, then gone before American pilots could even line up a shot. The K-14, incredible as it was, had met its first true enemy, velocity. Its mechanical gyroscopes could calculate lead for piston-engine aircraft, but the Me-262 moved so fast that bullets had to be fired where the jet would be several seconds in the future. The math required wasn't just complicated, it was beyond the limits of mechanical computation. Pilots complained through gritted teeth. The K-14 can't keep up. The diamonds swing too late. You can't hit what you can't catch. It wasn't just the Germans. The British and Americans were building jets too. The age of propeller fighters was ending, and with it, the K-14's reign over the skies. But the machine still had one last chapter, and it would end where the jet age began, with the man who used it better than anyone who ever lived, Major Richard Bong.
On August 6, 1945, the quiet hum of a jet engine replaced the roar of pistons over a California airfield. Major Richard "Dick" Bong, the deadliest American fighter pilot of World War II, climbed inside a sleek silver prototype called the P-80 Shooting Star. It was nothing like the war machines he knew. No propeller, no raw vibration, no smell of high-octane gasoline. Just a smooth metal lance powered by a whispering jet engine. The future of air combat sat wrapped around him like a coffin. Bong didn't have to be there. He didn't even have to fly again. He had survived 200 combat missions, earned the Medal of Honor, become the top American ace with 40 aerial victories, and returned home a national hero. But Lockheed had asked him to help test the P-80, America's first operational jet fighter, and Bong felt a responsibility to aviation itself. There was something missing inside the cockpit, though: the K-14 gunsight. The same mechanical brain that had helped him survive the war, helped him teach rookies how to kill, was gone. Jet combat was too fast for gyroscopes, too fast for bullets. The P-80 had no need for a gunsight that solved physics problems, because soon pilots wouldn't be firing bullets at all. They'd launch missiles. The age of aim was ending. Bong throttled forward and accelerated down the runway at Lockheed's Burbank facility. The P-80 lifted smoothly into the sky. For 15 minutes he explored the new world of jet flight, silent, clean, terrifyingly fast. At 2:30 p.m., disaster struck. The jet's fuel pump failed without warning. Power vanished. The aircraft became a gliding metal spear. Bong tried to restart the engine. Nothing. He dropped the nose to keep speed. No time, no altitude, no options. He could have stayed with the plane, tried to glide to the field, prayed for a miracle. Instead, he pulled the ejection handles. He never had a chance. His parachute barely opened before he hit the ground in a quiet Los Angeles neighborhood just miles from the airfield. Dick Bong, aviation's deadliest warrior, was gone. On that very same day, thousands of miles away, another piece of history tore through the sky. A B-29 bomber dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The world had just entered a new era of war, and Dick Bong's death marked the end of another. No more propeller duels, no more gunnery passes, no more mechanical sights. The age of bullets was over. The age of speed and machines had begun. When the war ended, the K-14 computing gunsight didn't get a parade. It didn't make headlines. It didn't become a monument. But inside a locked vault at Wright Field in September 1945, Colonel Cass Houff, the man who brought the gunsight to America, finished a quiet after-action report. The numbers told the story. Pilots using traditional reflector sights averaged 0.8 kills per mission. Pilots using the K-14 averaged 2.2 kills per mission. Aces increased by 400%. Ammunition waste dropped by more than half. But the most important sentence in the report wasn't about bullets or kill ratios. It was this: the K-14 has made accurate air combat achievable by the average pilot. Before the K-14, aerial killing was an art form, a mysterious talent possessed by a gifted few. After the K-14, it became a science. The gunsight didn't replace pilots. It elevated them, forced them to think in future tense, to act based on prediction instead of reaction. It taught them a brutal truth. Hitting a target is not about where it is. It's about where it will be. That single lesson didn't die with propeller fighters. It evolved. The early jet era brought new technologies, radar tracking, fire control computers, heat-seeking missiles, but all of them were built on the same foundation the K-14 had proved in war. Machines could think faster than humans under stress. The best pilots didn't resist that reality. They adapted to it. Many of them, men who once strapped K-14s into Mustangs and Lightnings, would go on to fly in the next frontier. They became test pilots at Edwards Air Force Base, then astronauts. They carried the K-14's legacy with them, not as hardware, but as mindset. When Apollo astronauts calculated trajectories to the moon, they weren't aiming at the moon itself. They were aiming at where the moon would be by the time they arrived. The same principle that helped win dogfights over Europe and the Pacific guided spacecraft across the void. In the end, that little gyroscopic gunsight, built in secret and trusted only by those willing to believe in it, did more than win air battles. It changed how humans think about motion, timing, and the future itself. Because in war, in physics, in life, you never aim at what is. You aim at what's coming.